Hello YouTube, this is Morgan, Airspeed Prime here with my next Star Wars novel review. This one is going to be for the Phasma novel. So, yeah, very disappointing character from the movies, Phasma, both 7 and 8. But when, obviously, I heard that this book was going to be announced, I decided, I would read it at some point, and I felt that, especially after how weak her performance in episode 8 was, I felt like I had to give at least the character a chance by reading the full novel that was released for the character. So I'm going to be doing this review in two sections. Most of the video is going to be a non-spoiler review, just talking in general about the book, but towards the end I'll make it really clear when I'll switch over to talking about spoilers and a lot of the details. I'll still cover details about the book in the non-spoiler section, but not the crazy events that happen, basically. So, yeah, it's overall I would say this is a really well written book. I think it's structured really well because it's Phasma. The book for the most part isn't really told from like Phasma's perspective a lot. It's mainly that like we are in this present day situation of this other First Order captain interrogating a resistance spy about Captain Phasma. So he is hearing these stories from this resistance spy, and she's obviously telling it from the perspective of how she was told the story, which is because this resistance spy visited the origin planet of Captain Phasma, which is Parnassus. She recently visited that place, and from one of the members of Phasma's old tribe, she heard all these stories about Phasma and how Phasma came to join the First Order. So that's how we get the stories. We get little bits and pieces also from Phasma's perspective, but that's for the most part after those stories from that situation are resolved. The structure that I said, I think it works really well. That it allows you to, at the same time, develop those two characters, the resistance spy Vi Maradi, as well as the other captain of the First Order who is interrogating her, who is Cardinal. And the idea is that Captain Phasma and Captain Cardinal basically had very similar positions, in that Phasma's obviously the Chrome captain, and then Cardinal wears full red stormtrooper outfit, with the idea is that before Phasma joined the First Order, Cardinal was the one who was the kind of figurehead in a way of the First Order stormtroopers. So he feels like he's sort of been replaced, and he's doing everything he can to basically get one over on Phasma to regain his position, trying to find any sort of kind of dirt on Phasma, because he sort of suspects that she's not the perfect soldier that everyone thinks she is. Where they also explain over the course of the book that the roles that each of the captains plays is that Cardinal trains the new recruits from basically when they're kids up until like their early teens, at which point they're turned over to Phasma, and Phasma gives them the kind of their first mission's actual training. And that's a big change, because they sort of over the book actually make you care about Cardinal, in that you sort of think Phasma is this perfect trooper sort of character, maybe a bit kind of has a bit of cruelty to her, but for the most part is this kind of perfect military kind of commander character. And what they do instead is they actually kind of make Cardinal that character. He's loyal to the First Order and follows orders. He's actually really nice to the children he trains, and they all like him, and he is a very well respected officer. And then over the course of the book you kind of realize that Phasma has all these other kind of elements to her. She still is much of what you expect from the movies, but there are all these other elements that they kind of throw in that kind of really change up how you feel about her. So in that case, I think the whole Cardinal character introduction here worked really well to kind of really separate what you think Phasma is from what she actually is, because you have Cardinal act as the person you expect Phasma to be. So that's the basic setup here for it, and why he's basically going against orders here, Cardinal, and interrogating this resistance spy, which he kind of found and kind of captured himself. And obviously during the interrogation, she is the one to tell him the stories of Phasma's origins, because she at some point traveled to Parnassus, Phasma's planet, met one of the survivors from the planet, and was told these stories. So it means that we get most of Phasma's story from the perspective of one of Phasma's warriors, whose name is Siv. And she's also a very interesting character with what they do with her, even by the end of the book, which I'll talk about in the spoiler section. But the core of what Phasma's origin story is, without going into every single detail, is that she is from this planet Parnassus, which, over the course of the book, they sort of established that it's this planet in ruin. Like about 100, 150 years ago or so, something happened to the planet that changed it from being a very kind of good technological planet to suddenly being a very primitive planet that doesn't have much technology. And what it means is that the tribe that Phasma is in this position where it can only cover a certain amount of ground. It can't travel across the planets because there aren't vehicles or anything like that. So they're stuck on this very small, period of section of land, and the life that they live is very bad in that if any of them get sick, they almost cannot cure it at all because there's no medicine. And because of the disaster in the past, it means that the planet can't really support growing all that much food, so the food doesn't have all the nutrients that they need, which means that they basically say the life expectancy on this planet is about 35, and that's at a stretch. That this is a really, really bad situation. That, combined with the fact that there are very rarely any new children born, means that Phasma's tribe at this point is a very, very small kind of thing. And eventually, basically the start of the story is that we see when Phasma and her brother kind of take over as kind of leaders of this tribe. And then fairly quickly after that, a First Order ship crash lands on their planet, and she and her warriors are some of the first people out to kind of find the survivors in a way. And this is where the book really kind of kicks off. We get a little bit of an introduction to the planet and what it's like, what Phasma's life is like. But what really changes is obviously who they meet. It's a First Order ship, and who they meet are basically a couple of stormtroopers and then their commander here, who is General Hux. But not the one from the movies, his father. So Armitage Hux is the guy from episode 7 and 8. This is Brendol Hux, his father. So we meet him, and all he wants to do is basically to get back to basically where his kind of where the main ship kind of crashed, so they can send word out to be actually picked up. And most of the book is about this kind of journey of these First Order people have come into contact with this tribe, and they want to get back to their ship to escape. And so what happens here is that Phasma actually puts a lot of faith and hope in the First Order, seeing that they're technologically advanced, and decides that anything is better than living the way we are now. I'll take anyone who wants to follow me and guide you back to your ship because I know the land better than most people do. This causes a bit of a rift with her brother, because her and her brother are kind of co-leading the tribe. He wants to keep things the way they are and stay where they are, respecting the tradition. She doesn't, and basically abandons him and takes, I think it's 5 warriors with her, including Siv and some other characters who we meet as the book progresses. And the big shift from Phasma as a character is that when we're introduced to her, she is the character you expect her to be. She's a warrior. She's like 2 meters tall. She's super imposing, strong. She's a leader. She trains the up-and-coming warriors. And the big thing they do is that they establish that she really, really cares about the people that she's leading. And what shifts, is that when she meets the First Order and sees that what they have to offer, and sees the fact that Brendol actually has a bit of an interest in her because of how good of a warrior she is is very quick to abandon the traditions of her past, leave people that she cares about behind her. And this becomes this really interesting kind of character trait for Phasma, where they try to establish across the entire book that Phasma isn't really loyal. She's only really loyal to herself and will do anything she can within her ability to survive and thrive and get into a better position. So if that involves leaving her brother behind, she'll do it. If it involves having to let some of her people die, so be it. And they almost take this approach of the influence from Brendel, who's obviously a leader of the First Order and not a particularly nice person. His influence on her, like, exemplifies this, makes this kind of trait within Phasma even bigger. So she's even more quicker and quicker to side with the First Order and not respect her people as much. And you see this, obviously, most of it from Civ's perspective. And so she knows Phasma from when they were smaller and they basically grew up together. And so you get this perspective of Civ knows who Phasma is, but does constantly say that she has this feeling about Phasma that she never really knows who Phasma is, because they establish this unique thing about Phasma where, like, she talks to people and is a leader and is a good leader, but really doesn't have, like, personal conversations with people at all. That there's this real distance that she creates between herself and everyone else. And they start to present this idea of, like, the warrior culture of Parnassus involves that the warriors wear masks, and it's a very tribal system. So she wears a mask most of the time and barely takes it off. Eventually, over the course of the story, one of the stormtroopers they're with gets injured, and she ends up putting the armor on because why not have a really good warrior also wear good armor? So she puts on a normal stormtrooper outfit, and it's meant to be this huge moment within the book where she shifts from still being focused on the warrior thing to almost like becoming a stormtrooper commander. Because that's basically what happens, where, like, she and Brendel are the ones leading this group in their trek across the planet. And even the stormtroopers who are trained and stuff like that, she almost becomes their leader just by default, without even properly being part of the system in the First Order. And that's what they do so well across, like, the entirety of the book, as they encounter these different things across, as the journey across the planet proceeds. You learn more about why the planet is the way it is. I won't spoil it, but you learn exactly what happened to the planet, basically, and how little the inhabitants of the planet knew about it. And all of these sort of, like, tragic kind of things that are in place because they were in such a low like period of technology, that it could have been so much better for them if they had just, like, moved to a different section of the planet. And it's very interesting because, like, they make the planet a bit of a mystery of its own that feels just as interesting as learning about Phasma. Because, as I said, with Phasma, there is that idea of, like, you see this shift from her from being very warrior focused to suddenly being very invested, putting everything about her people and her own hopes on the First Order, and how that changes her. But she still fundamentally is the very same character, because of some reveals later on in the book that they do, where they go, like, even further back into her past, and so on. They basically make this statement about the character where, like, yeah, you thought there were good aspects of her, but actually, no, she's been a, you know, bad character from the very, very beginning. I'll talk about that in the spoiler section a bit more, but the core of the book is that you get this journey across the planet. Eventually they get there, and this is obviously where the book shifts, because Phasma's origin story is being told to us through stories that someone else knows. We get cutouts to what's actually happening between, like, Cardinal and the spy he's interrogating. And the entire time she is trying to, like, turn him. She's trying to use the story of Phasma and who Phasma is to turn Cardinal away from the First Order and show him that they don't care about you being a perfect loyal soldier. They just want someone who's ruthless and willing to kill. Can you not see that based on the way they immediately jumped and put Phasma in a position ahead of you? And they managed to, over the course of that story, really make you care about the dynamic between, you know, interrogator and the person being interrogated. In that you see that Cardinal is actually this very, very reasonable character. And while he tries to put on the show of being the hardcore interrogator and torturing her, he very quickly becomes kind of nice to her because he honestly is invested in the story of Phasma and wants to hear it. And when we come out of it constantly, he feels like, okay, I have enough information, and he makes these moves to try and use the information he's been given to try and get one over on Phasma, but it's, you know, he gets kind of pushed back, and it's not really working, and then he's told other plans, bits and pieces, and that's where the book kind of comes to a conclusion, with some of the final key moments of the book, in that the journey is only, I'd say, about like 3/4 of the book. The final quarter is like, okay, most of the stories have been already told. Here's what's happening now, present day. How does Cardinal react to knowing all this information? Not really having proof outside of just hearing this story about Phasma. What does he do, and how does that affect him and his view of the First Order, knowing that they very quickly accelerated someone like Phasma into a position that she's in? So I'm pretty much going to wrap up the non-spoiler section of the book there, because I feel like I can't really continue to discuss it without actually talking more about the details. But just know that I think this is a book very much worth reading. Not because it's going to add stuff onto how you view the movie, because I think with regards to the movie, the only thing the book really helps to explain is that, okay, this is why Phasma has an extra focus on melee combat. The book eventually does explain why her armor is chrome and where she got it from. And it helps to give a little bit of extra dynamic to her character outside of just being a soldier commander. But it really highlights that the movie just doesn't present any of the unique aspects of Phasma as a character. That in the movie, her whole dynamic is just that Finn betrays the First Order. She's not happy with that because she trained Finn and has a bit of a vendetta against him, which is more or less resolved in episode 8. It makes it so much. It makes it that, like, I almost, after reading this book, feel that Phasma is a book character who happened to be in the movies rather than like the other way around. Just because I feel like she's much more interesting in the book than she is in the movies. So I'd make the statement of, like, I feel that they've left Phasma open to a sequel, and I feel that the best place to use Phasma, if you haven't killed her off in 8, is not to return in episode 9, but to return in a sequel to the Phasma book. I think that would be so much more interesting, because you have all these characters established in the book who she has these dynamics with, and it feels like there's something set up there if Phasma was to survive what happens in episode 8. So I'll shift over to spoilers now. Just know that I really do recommend the book, but if you've read the book already or just want to know the full details of the book, we'll get into them here. So the big reveals towards the end of the book that happen are basically full reveals about just how much Phasma has kind of betrayed people in the past. That she portrays this idea of that she's this loyal leader you can trust, but that fundamentally the only person she really truly cares about when it comes down to it is herself. And she'll do anything to survive, anything to thrive and advance if she feels it's worthwhile. And we learn that part of the dynamic of her and her brother being kind of co-leaders is that he in the past had basically lost one of his legs. One of his legs was effectively useless, so he couldn't be a warrior, but he was so intelligent he was considered just as much of a leader as Phasma, who was primarily the muscle. And there's this story that we're told very early in Phasma's life about how her brother got injured. And it's revealed that as a way to get Phasma's tribe, which originally was this very, very small tribe, separate to the one she and her brother become leader of later on, are kind of being attacked by the other tribe, and she feels that the only way to survive is to join the tribe that's attacking them. Her brother doesn't want to, her father doesn't want to, so what she does is she stabs her brother in the leg so he can't fight back or act, basically, and in secret agrees to join the other clan, and it means that her brother can't refuse because he has to undergo medical treatment. And she just has basically decided at a very young age that she and her brother need to be part of this tribe to survive, and she doesn't care about her parents. She basically, in doing this deal, causes her parents to be killed, because the only people she really saves from her tribe are herself and her brother, and even then she wounds her brother so badly he can't fight anymore. And this is to get them into the position where we start the book with, where it seemed like Phasma was like such a unbelievably well-respected character. And then over the course of the book, you see her make all of these different decisions where, like, initially she's loyal to her people, but then she starts to be only loyal to Brendol and the First Order, because she makes these decisions like, oh, instead of in the middle of a fight going to save one of their other warriors who's just been hit, she guards Brendol instead. And Civ notices this, and notices this change in her as she goes from wearing the warrior armor to suddenly towards the end of the book, she's wearing like almost a complete, misfitting, ill-fitting, but a complete set of stormtrooper armor, and how different she is from there to now. And it gets to the point where when they arrive at the ship and they've made this deal that basically everyone is going to go with the First Order to have a better life, what happens is that what happens? Phasma's brother makes a really bad mistake, which makes you dislike him as a character. Where Phasma leaves and he didn't want to, he ends up following them and doesn't try to negotiate with them, but instead tries to kill them. He teams up with basically their enemy group and goes to attack Phasma and the First Order, and it leads to this massacre towards the end of the book, where nearly everyone is killed, and like the only survivors are Civ, Phasma, and then Phasma's niece, who is basically is established to be the only child of her generation in the entirety of Phasma and her brother's tribe, and it's Phasma's niece, of course. They're the only people left alive after this huge battle. So when they finally arrive at the ship, Brendol says that, okay, Phasma, you can come with us. We'll take the child as well. But Civ, you are not allowed to come because you're too soft. Because over the course of the book, we see that Civ, we find out that she's pregnant over the course of the book as well, with one of the other warriors' kids, who he dies right towards the end of the book. Really, really tragic kind of scene where they establish that what's happening in this battle is that this really close-knit tribal group has been split right down the middle between Phasma and her brother. And what ends up happening is that the father of Civ's child, his brother ends up killing him, and then Civ kills, the brother who killed the father of her child. It's really, really dark in a way. And that, like, Civ is also forced to kill the mother of the little girl as well. Now, the girl doesn't see this, but it just speaks to, like, this is the situation that they've been put in, where Civ has made these decisions to kind of help her child, because she doesn't want it to be like all the other times where there's been so many women who have died in childbirth or have miscarried or something like that. She wants her child to actually survive, and she feels that the First Order and their medicine is the only way to make that happen. And it's such a big betrayal right at the end of the book, where Phasma agrees with Brendol that, no, you can't come with us, stay here. There's a medical facility over there. I hope you'll be okay, but she just leaves. And I think that is the moment where you kind of in a way give up on Phasma, where you, like Civ, feel the most betrayal ever, because Civ has been so loyal to Phasma across this journey and has done everything for her. So many of her friends, family, effectively, her husband in a way, have been killed in pursuit of this, and then Phasma just abandons her at the last moment. Thankfully what happens is that she goes to the medical facility, and there's medical droids there, and they help her with the radiation poisoning she's suffering from, and we find out that her child will be okay. And we basically get a quick kind of recap of, like, Civ, of course, is the one who told Vi the story, and then Vi is relaying that to the Cardinal and us, and that's how they met. So Civ, of course, survives all of this, and she has her daughter as well, and her daughter is fine. I'll explain the whole radiation and what went on with the planet in just a second, but right at the end of the book, what we get is that, very quickly, Cardinal eventually becomes so disheartened in the First Order because of what's happened that he decides to basically let Vi go. He will use the evidence as well as the stories that Vi has told him to try and get everyone in the First Order to understand who Phasma actually is. and basically get her demoted or thrown out of the First Order. So he lets Vi go and goes to confront Phasma. Initially, he talks to Armitage Hooks, and nothing goes on. Hooks knows about everything that's happened, because the big reveal that really shifts everything for the Cardinal is that Brendel Hooks, they kind of established early on in the story that he died fairly recently. And they established that what happened was that Phasma plotted with Armitage Hooks to kill Brendel Hooks. Because Phasma, you find out that one thing she does is that she doesn't like people to know about who she actually is. She doesn't like people to know about all of these betrayals that she's made in her past, and she always gets rid of the evidence, and she feels that Brendel has become that evidence, and that he knows about the way she betrayed Civ and all of her people. And so even though she really devotes everything to him, like she owes everything to him for saving her basically, but she still kills him. And it's this huge turning point, because you find out that Cardinal basically looks up to Brendel like a father, because Brendel also saved Cardinal and brought him into the First Order. So it's this huge betrayal moment where when he hears this, and this basically like destroys Cardinal's world, and he becomes disenfranchised with the First Order. Eventually what happens is that he confronts Phasma. He's not getting anywhere, so he feels the only way to do this is to confront Phasma and beat her in combat. She ends up defeating Cardinal. We get this idea that one of her warrior weapons from the tribal past was this knife that she had that was kind of covered in poison, and she stabs Cardinal and basically leaves him to die, basically revealing that, like, yeah, what you learned about me is true. My true nature is that, yeah, I take out anyone that is witness to my mistakes and anything like that, so I can always guarantee my survival and guaranteeing that I'll thrive in whatever position I'm in. The mistake that happens here is that Vi actually comes back and saves Cardinal in this really great moment, because over the course of the book you get that Vi is this fairly kind of like bubbly character in a way. She is making a lot of jokes, and she very much can see that Cardinal is a good man at heart, even though he's a member of the First Order. She believes really thoroughly that she can turn him. So she comes back for him. She ends up managing to escape the ship that they're on with Cardinal, and we basically end the book with Cardinal put in a medically induced coma, and you know, the idea that we will survive, because where Vi is heading back to is Parnassus, where Civ is, because she kind of promised Civ, where she learned all these stories from, that she would come back for her and take her away from the planet at last, so her daughter can actually have a good place to live. So we end the book with this kind of setup for like a potential story to happen somewhere down the line, where Vi and Cardinal arrive on Parnassus, meet up with Civ and her daughter, and you know, I'm thinking that if Phasma survives episode 8, she could end up back on Parnassus, and it would be this really cool situation of, can we do the death of Phasma properly on this kind of planet here, where Cardinal gets kind of revenge against Phasma, Civ in a way gets revenge against Phasma, and it's just this final arc for her, and we really bring that arc to a conclusion for the character. I feel that's the best way to do it, rather than, oh, Finn hit her because she wasn't looking what he fell into, and she's now fallen into the into the fire here in episode 8. But yeah, Parnassus, and I suppose the history of the planet. Why is there a medical facility on this planet that doesn't have any technology? Well, what happens here is that we find out that what happened was that about 200 years ago, the Constar Mining Corporation came to the planet Parnassus and basically took over the entire planet, more or less. They created all these different stations, one for like making food, one for making cloth, one is more of a kind of smelting kind of plant, and they're amazing technology that basically is this really durable bunkers basically that they're made out of. That's why they survived as long as they have, and each of these facilities basically like fixes itself, so that's why it survived so long with no real looking after. The problem is that something that the Constar Mining Corporation did in the past led to a a giant nuclear explosion going off, basically, which had the effect of effectively destroying a huge aspect of like the ecosystem of the planet. And this explains why Phasma, where her kind of people are, why they can't really grow anything, why they all die so young, and so on, that they suffered because of this explosion and the past of their planet that they never knew about. And the tragic reveal at the end is that if they had just taken the entire tribe and kind of just walked to like the other hemisphere of the planet, they would have been fine, because the nuclear explosion basically only like made like half of the planet lifeless, and if they had managed to go to the other half, they could have lived perfectly fine. If they had managed to find one of the Constar mining bunkers, they could have had a safe house for all of them to live in. And part of the journey, of course, along the way is that they kind of come across these different situations. One of the mining corporation bunkers, the droids that are running it have sort of come to see the owners of the Constar Mining Corporation as like gods, and capture them when they come across them, and basically force them into like becoming employees of Constar Mining. And they eventually managed to get out of this, and it's part of, I suppose, Civ's arc here, where she realizes that like these damaged droids have sort of become even more human because of their damage, and they kind of treat the humans who kind of control this, as even though they're dead, as gods. And so she's kind of shocked when Brendol just shuts them all down, and that she, not knowing much about technology, considers him just doing this like with a touch of a button as him killing an entire culture, an entire species. And it's why, come the end of the book, when she's forced to walk into like the medical facility, Constar Mining Corporation thing, and she's perfectly fine with the droids looking after her, because they say basically that for the last 10 years, Civ has just lived in this medical bunker. She's basically had unlimited food, she has all these droids to help look after her, and she doesn't mind droids that much. Vi does say that she was very happy when she met another human at last and was very willing to tell the stories. But that Civ was okay living with the droids, that she found a certain happiness in just having her child there, and them being safe and having all the food that they needed. And that was a nice sort of happy ending for like the character you really care about in the story. And of course the setup is that Vi is coming back for her. We'll see how Cardinal reacts to when he arrives on the planet, and if he does finally make his big turn. And then Phasma could very well be involved in the story as well. But I just thought this book overall came together really, really well. Like, really well. I loved the structure of just cutting out to the dynamic between Cardinal and Vi, and then cutting back into the story, and we have like Civ and Phasma, Brendol Hux, and learning about the planet Parnassus and the effect that this corporation going overboard with the mining had on this planet, and just all the tragic kind of things that happened because they didn't have technology, they didn't know what was going on, and felt that the only way to be safe was to stick to their small patch of ground, even though it was like damaged so badly to its core by this nuclear apocalypse, basically, that the only hope that they had to survive was to go to a different section of the planet completely. It's really, really interesting, I think, throughout. I think it, in a way, is one of the best written Star Wars books I've read. It's just kind of, in a way, unfortunate that like this book happens and is the origin story of like Phasma as a character, who is like a non-entity basically in the movies, yet she has this like amazing book that's kind of built around her. And like I think the only criticism really of the book is that while it adds extra layers to Phasma as a character, at a base level Phasma is not that interesting as a character. As I explained here, like learning that she actually is this kind of very disloyal character who only cares about herself, and if she makes a mistake will do anything possible to shift that mistake onto someone else, get rid of any witnesses to the fact that she made a mistake, and is constantly trying to destroy the person that she was before. So now that she's Captain Phasma of the First Order, she basically eliminates any connection to her past on Parnassus, which basically happens. She ends up like killing almost everyone close to her. She kills her own brother. She leads to the death of basically everyone she ever cared about. And in a way, the only loose end is that I think Phasma expected Civ to just die on her own on the planet and isn't aware that she's actually alive. You even learn that her niece, who of course was taken towards the end of the book, and was inducted into the First Order military, she graduated as a stormtrooper, but then Phasma basically had her kind of killed on a training exercise because of like a blaster malfunction. So it just speaks to the fact that that's what this character is willing to do to maintain their position. That she's this really distrustful and like fearful character in a way of being in any sort of position that's not a position of power. And that makes her very interesting in that if you've read the Phasma comic that came out fairly recently, which explains what happens to Phasma between episodes 7 and 8, that comic also gets across this side of Phasma's personality, that she doesn't want to ever look like she's failed to her superiors because she's so fearful of losing her position. So we know that Phasma was the one who lowered the shields and basically allowed Starkiller Base to be destroyed. But what we get in that comic is that she passes the blame onto this random officer and then goes on this crazy journey with a stormtrooper pilot to hunt down and kill this guy and make it like be like, okay, this guy led to the destruction of Starkiller Base. He's been dealt with. And it's this really, really tragic story even in that book, in that comic, where the pilot is who's this like female stormtrooper. You really get to know this character, and like you see this that this stormtrooper actually also cares. It is somewhat similar to Cardinal as a character. She kills this stormtrooper at the end because she heard Phasma talk about the fact that she was the one who lowered the shields to someone else. She kills this droid that they're with as well, and so she returns at the end of that comic to the First Order, just herself and the TIE Fighter, and basically just says that, oh yeah, everyone else happened to die on the mission, but everything's fine now. And I think that's a really interesting idea for a character, in that she is very powerful, she is very strong, but is so afraid of basically failing and losing the position that she's in. She'd do anything, leave anything behind, betray anyone to make that happen. And that doesn't come across at all in the movies. In that, as I said, in the movies, like it explains like her extra focus on melee combat, and in that she originally came from a tribal planet. It explains why she's such a good teacher in a way, and why she's such a good warrior. We get the explanation of where her chrome armor comes from. The explanation on that, I think everyone pretty much knows it now, is that the ship that Brendol Hux crashes on the planet in is a ship that he acquired, which was originally one of Palpatine's Naboo ships, the big chrome ships from the prequels. She, after a year of training in the First Order, comes back to Parnassus, digs up that ship, and goes into the Constar mining smelting section, and basically scans her current armor, just standard Stormtrooper armor, and then plates it with the chrome kind of plating of the ship. And that's why she has that armor. She doesn't tell anyone about it. She just appears one day with the chrome armor, and everyone's kind of happy about it. So that explains where she gets that armor from. And then, yeah, the little bit towards the end where like Armitage Hux becomes a little bit more present to the character, and you find out that they basically conspired together to kill Brendol Hux, despite... And he's a character who, like, you dislike him. You find him very interesting over the course of the book, but you do dislike him. But it's still this tragic event when you just realize that, whoa, Phasma just killed him for what happened. And it's this idea where, like, initially Cardinal kind of feels that, okay, I understand why she would kill Brendol, because he retroactively kind of led to the death of all of her kind of other warriors. But then all the other stories comes out, and Cardinal suddenly realizes that no, she killed Brendel because he saw what she did, how she betrayed her people, and she doesn't want that disloyalty to come across to anyone. And again, that's why she's so interesting as a character in the book, but none of it's in the show or the movies. So that's my review of Phasma, the novel. I thought it was a really, really, really good book. It completely blew away my expectations. I highly recommend this book to anyone. Obviously, I think to some degree you have to sort of care about like wanting a little bit of development on Phasma if you just completely don't care about the character. I still think it's an okay book, but if you're open to finding out anything about Phasma, this is the perfect book for you. So I'm probably going to do a review of the Thrawn novel at some point in the next couple of days, but just be aware that that'll probably be the next thing that I do. But yeah, that's been the video. In the comments, let me know what your thoughts were on the book if you read it, or just your thoughts on what I have to say about it here. But thanks for watching this video, and bye.